Your bank would never try to sell you, right? Scott Terrio is here to discuss it, starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Today, we are going to discuss how to spot the bank's sales tricks. Scott Terrio is here. Welcome back. We are in our Toronto office. And usually what we do for these shows is we come up with a whole bunch of things and we discuss it back and forth. And this time we've done completely different. We've had, of course, Miriam, who does all our thinking for us, come up with some basic points. And then rather than us reviewing what we're going to talk about, I said, hey, let's just start the show, and off we go. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So this will either be fantastic or a complete train wreck. Let's find out.
We've got an equal shot at
both. Shot, 50-50. Well, and frankly, this is a pretty simple topic, I think.
It is.
Because what people don't understand, well, some people don't understand, banks are always selling you stuff.
Yep.
And it's not just banks, it's everybody. Everybody's trying to sell you something. Yeah. Now, when you go into a car dealership, you understand they are trying to sell you a car.
Because you're only there for sales.
That's why you're there. There's no other reason you're going there.
Why? Banking has this notion that, you're there to do transactions, or that you're there to, move money around. And also an outdated notion, especially in Canadian, post-colonial big chartered bank culture, that the bank is there to look after you. And that's where this gets troubling.
Yeah, and you're right. In the old days, we went to a bank to deposit a check or to get cash out. It was a transactional thing.
Or get a money order or traveler's checks.
Yes, good old traveler's checks.
Old enough to remember that?
I don't think anyone on YouTube would know what a traveler's check
I'm really hoping not.
That's right. So, and, I'm just reading through, Straight Talk on Your Money, of course, one of the greatest books ever written by a guy named Doug Hoyes. And I mean, myth number 3, experts are experts. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's, we talked about banking, a whole bunch of different things in here. So, okay. So let's talk about these sales tricks that they use. And you're right. The key point here is I'm going into a bank thinking I'm going there to do a transaction, but in fact, I'm going to get sold to.
Yeah. And from an industry standpoint, banking, especially in Canada, is not what I'd call a mature market, in the sense that they're, you can only get market share from someone else, because there's new people to Canada. There's people who are, coming of age in terms of age of majority, right? You're turning 18 and you're going into the banking world. And so, and this is partly why when you, go to college or university, there are 5 tables set up, or 6, in the foyer when you arrive for Frosh Week. CIBC, TD, Scotia, BMO, Royal. And maybe sometimes 5. National Bank. National Bank's like the Y of the vowels. It's like sometimes National Bank, sometimes Y.
Exactly.
Anyway, they're all set there with their tables, and they all have their sales tactics. And it's all someone young and attractive who's sitting there ready to, because if they can get you at age 18, they've got you for life, more or less. And so this is a pretty big capture for them. And then we'll get into more about the bank culture. But I just wanted to express that it is important to get somebody either when they're new to the country or when they're 18 or 19 or 20, because then you got them for a while.
Well, it'd be interesting for people watching on YouTube. Put a comment. How many banks have you banked with in your life? And the typical Canadian would be, well, 1 or maybe 2. Yeah. I mean, I was with a bank because my parents were with that bank.
Same.
And then when I got married, I switched to my wife's bank.
Same.
That's it. That's my entire.
We followed the program, both of us.
That's it. And here I am, almost 60 years old.
Yeah, and we
with 2 banks.
And the reason that we know about this is because we meet with 5 or 10 people a day who we advise to change banks, typically because they're heavily indebted to the bank they've banked with since they were 5. And then we have to be the bearers of bad news to say that bank's not going to love you so much once you file an insolvency, because they're going to seek to use their right of offset to potentially take any funds that go in there, either cash that's been sitting there already or your next paycheck or whatever. We discussed that topic on podcast number 428, by the way, back when I was on with you and we talked about the bank's right of offset.
Could have been 3 months ago, could have been a year. I had no conception of time, but I will put a link to that one in the show notes.
Yeah, and so that one, if you're interested in this, I would check that out, because that goes through into detail on how the banks are able to do this kind of stuff, which is not typically known.
Exactly. I'll also put a link to the show we did with Joel a few weeks ago. Should you only bank at one bank? Should you have more than one bank account? We'll put that in as well. Now, before we get into the meat of the show, on June the 19th, the Globe and Mail published a very interesting article. I'll put a link to it. Unfortunately, it's behind a paywall, so if you don't subscribe to Globe, you won't be able to read it. But I would like you to read some excerpts from it. So the title of the article was Pervasive Sales Culture at Canadian Banks Designed to Push Customers into High-Fee Products.
And I gathered, too, that this is kind of a series they're working on. So I would, if you're interested, check it out, because there's going to be probably some pretty good investigative stuff going on in this. I'd like to quote from that.
Go ahead. Read some quotes.
Okay. And I have my old guy glasses on. What you can't see is my hearing aid. So I'm all geared up for the under 40 crowd.
Yeah.
I'm not acceptable because of all my devices, but I am acceptable because of my advice. So
and the only reason I can read stuff is because I just hold it 4 feet away from me. That's in a big font. That's the secret.
Quote, many branch-based financial planners are paid on a 100% commission basis, but some are salary-based employees who receive an annual bonus for hitting performance goals, which include sales targets. The rewards are greater for selling products that make your employer more money, such as the bank's own lineup of mutual funds. Okay, is that biased or not? Another quote, in this way, the system always incentivizes the sale of funds with higher fees, end quote. And another quote, there is just extreme pressure on people to meet quotas, said this person, right from the tellers up to what they call a financial planner. It is a model that revolves around sales.
Exactly right. The reason branches exist is for sales. And the article goes on, and we've discussed this many times on the show. Anybody, and I'm exaggerating a bit here because there have been some recent rule changes, but anybody can call themselves an expert, a financial guy, whatever. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Now, we have had on this show numerous financial planners, CFPs, certified financial planners, who are actually licensed. Jason Heath, Sandy Martin, Rona Birnbaum, Shannon Lee Simmons, Chris Enns. I will put links to all of those shows going back to 2018 in the show notes as well. We've talked about this. There is a difference between a fee-only financial planner who charges you an hourly rate or whatever their rate is to give you advice, and then the salespeople at the banks who, as you said, are paid in many cases on a 100% commission basis.
Yeah, think about that.
100% commission
basis. Here's another beauty. Quote, last December, for example, the Bank of admitted that advisors, you can read it yourself, admitted that advisors at its securities arm used improper transactions and unsuitable investments to boost their own performance figures. Nearly 50 advisors were involved, exposing more than 10,000 client accounts to potential losses.
Oops. Well, here's another quote from the same article. In 2007, all 5 of Canada's largest banks settled with regulators after it was found that they had overcharged customers for investments, excess fees that amounted to tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Oops. So, okay. Now, every industry wants to make money.
Yeah.
So we're not here to trash the banks because that's just
not
easy.
From a motive standpoint.
No. It's what they're doing. What we're here to do is,
in fact, if you own bank stocks, they're helping you.
Fantastic. It's fantastic. What we're here to do is take the other side of it and say, okay, you are a customer of a bank.
Yeah.
Because in Canada, you have no choice. Like, your employer is going to deposit your paycheck in a bank. That's how it works. I mean, here at Hoyes Michaelis, I'm an employer. We're not yet at the point where we're paying people in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Maybe next year, but none of my employees, not one single
Possibly
employee.
Possibly good you didn't bite the bullet on that in 2022, 2021.
Not one single employee has come to me and said, hey, can we start getting paid in Bitcoin? So we still deal in fiat currency. It all has to go into a bank somewhere. So we all have to be customers of banks.
Yes.
So where do you want to start? Do you want to start with how banks view their customers? Where do you want to go?
I think it's good to keep in mind two C's, competition and commissions. I think if you have those in mind, you will know entering into discussions with a bank where you stand and where they stand. It is not impossible to get around this. The bank tailors its pitches to you, its sales pitches, because it knows all kinds of stuff about you. Okay, this is no different, frankly, than, I'm going to trash somebody who's not a bank here, but the Credit Karmas and the Borrowells of the world, who they get your information because they say, hey, this would be great for you, wouldn't it? You give them all your information, and then all of a sudden you get 50 emails targeting you with products. Well, why do you think that happened? You're the product, and they sold you product, or they're trying to sell you products that they're paid to sell.
Yeah, you are the product.
If it's free, you're the product.
Exactly.
So this is, if you enter into discussions with a bank, I've told clients to say at the outset of a meeting that I am not agreeing to anything that you sell me. And if you try to sell me something while I'm here to talk about my banking needs, I'm gonna end the meeting. Bank employees are not wired to handle that kind of verbiage. So they will probably sit there thinking, I don't know if I'm going to get any commissions today, but they will react rather strongly to that, I think, in a way that suits you.
Yeah, and this is important advice we give our clients because, as you said at the start of the show, in virtually all cases, when someone comes in to see us to file a consumer proposal or bankruptcy, we say you have to open a new bank account at a new bank because you've got a credit card at the bank you're with. When we file the insolvency, there's nothing to stop the bank from trying to continue to take out the monthly payment.
Which leads to my point I was going to make further down the road here, which is possibly the most dangerous time to meet with the bank is when you're new to them, because they're now trying to sell you everything. When you've been with the bank forever, yes, they can target you with products because they know all kinds of things about you. But when you're new to a bank, that's really when they go after you, okay, because you're fresh meat. And we are told this by clients. So here you have people who are coming in to see us on the verge of filing an insolvency proceeding. They got lots of debt. I don't want my clients who go to get a new bank to get more debt because we're busy working on the existing debt. So if you have $50,000 in debt, I don't want you saying yes to a $10,000 MasterCard because chances are, especially today with the cost of living, you will end up potentially running that up.
Something will happen.
I don't want to get rid of 50 and then you have 10 because we've not solved a problem here. Okay, so while it's sometimes either preferable or even important to get a credit card that you can function with from your new bank, because you don't have credit cards when you come to see us, they're all gone. And it's very hard to exist in the world without at least a small credit card. It is key to get a small balance and keep it at that. And just use what you need, pay it off, use what you need, pay it off, because you can rebuild your credit doing that, but I don't want you getting into a 5 or 6-digit, problem again. So this is why we have so much experience telling clients about this stuff and knowing what the sales tactics are like when they're new to a bank.
Yep. We tell them, get the new account opened and just say no to everything else. Yep. Look, once your proposal is done and things are going great, if you want to then go and get credit cards and mortgages and car loans and investments and all the rest of it, that's fantastic. But for now, you want a bank account you can deposit your paycheck into and pay your rent. That's it.
Yeah. And just be wary when banks try to become your financial advisor, right? Because we're going back to the, using a proper trained outside or sort of neutral bank or financial advisor. I've had banks try to tell people to cash RSPs to pay their debts. Like it's wrong in 5 ways that I'd rather not go into right now. But that kind of stuff that they tell you in straight-faced language is very dangerous for you. And so you don't want to be getting into a position where you're relying on someone or you seem to be relying on someone at the bank who's advising you other than, just banking.
Yeah. And what you're alluding to is that if you file a bankruptcy in Canada, your RRSP is exempt from seizure, meaning we can't take it except for what you contributed to it in the last year.
Yes.
So if you've had an RRSP at the bank for 10 years and haven't contributed to it and you go bankrupt, you don't lose it.
Yeah.
So cashing it in is an asset you wouldn't have lost anyways, but guess what? You're going to incur a big tax liability to do it.
So you're going to get taxed for withdrawing it, and then they're going to add, it to your income.
And then you don't have the money.
It almost never works out to be worth having done it.
Yeah. I mean, if you've got $10,000 worth of credit card debt and you got $100,000 in your RSP and you want to cash some of it in to pay it off, fine. I'm not saying never, 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 but on the eve of an insolvency, that is not a good answer.
No.
But a banker will make money by cashing in one investment to buy another one.
Yeah.
Because then I get the fee twice.
Or the old, borrow to save, right? So pitch getting a credit product from me, the bank, in order to either save or invest or whatever.
An RSP loan.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like these things are often dangerous, and it may not seem like that because they know how to pitch it. So again, I think you want to avoid the discussion entirely if you can, because these people are trained to get around your objections.
Yeah. And if an RSP loan is actually a good idea for you, and I'm not going to comment because I don't know your situation, but if it is, that is something you should think about in advance.
Yeah.
And then you should go to the bank and say, here's what I want.
Yeah, that should
I want
be
to get
proactive
it
instead of reactive.
It
exactly.
should be proactive.
Well said. Like you shouldn't be making decisions of that magnitude or nature based on questions you've answered in a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Like that shouldn't be a news item.
Yeah, because if I wanted to sell you that loan, I'd say, well, what's your tax bracket? Oh, I don't know. Well, let's assume it's 50%. If you get this $10,000 RSP loan and put it in your RSP, you're going to save $5,000 in taxes. Oh, that sounds fantastic. Okay, what are all the other implications to that? What's the interest rate? How long is it going to take me to pay it back?
Yeah. And you don't want a 10 or 15-minute meeting or discussion to lead to a 10-year problem, right? Because if you've already got 20 or 30,000 in debt, maybe it's high interest, and you make a mistake like that, that might be it, right? That might just be enough to kind of push you over the edge. So yes, again, proactivity versus reactivity. Be careful when you're entering a meeting and you start going down the road of discussions that you had no intention of going to before you went into the meeting.
Right. When you go to get a credit card and you end up with a car loan, then something's a little wacky here.
Yes.
And so why is it so hard then to know when I am being sold to by a bank?
Well, again, they have flow charts and training. So they will match it to what your financial or banking history is oftentimes, right? So it'll sound very smooth and very connected to the discussion you're having, right? Because they got all their data on the computer. And 10 minutes before you came in, I boned up on all of it. And like I know exactly what sweet spot I have to hit.
Yeah, and that's another key point here. They have all the data on you.
Yeah.
So if you've been banking at that bank for more than 5 minutes, they know where you work because your paycheck gets put in there. Yeah. They know how much of a tax refund you got last year. But of course, they have access to your entire credit report.
Yeah, and don't think this is some benevolent offering, right? I mean, obviously they're making money from whatever they're suggesting on you because banks don't do stuff for free. But they're also doing it entirely based on your own history. And so nothing coming out of their mouth is creative or new, really. It's based on all this stuff we know about you, especially if you've been banking there since you were 10.
Yeah. Which you probably have been.
Yeah.
So if your credit isn't great, here, we're going to offer you this credit card that has a 20% interest rate. Yeah. If your credit's pretty good, hey, we've got this line of credit, this car loan product. Yeah. And if your credit's really good, hey, we've got mortgages. We'd like to lend you $1 million. Yeah. And the computer can tell them instantly what the offers are. And in fact, you see this if you remember, in the pre-pandemic days when you went into a bank and you put your thing in the machine and the
like some psycho.
I know, some whack job.
Went into a bank.
Right. And the teller says, we've got this special deal today, Mr. Hoyes. You can get this credit card offer just for you, whatever. And I see this as well when I log into my online bank. Oh, you've been pre-approved for this thing or that thing.
Yeah.
And so is it true then that banks sell to you everywhere?
I think so. And banks are getting sophisticated too, right? They're not just meeting with, old dudes with bank books who walk in with a cane, right? They're getting online. They are figuring out all the tactics because the people they've got doing their code are 20 or 30, right? So those people live in that world. And so, I've seen like banks are getting much more modern, whereas they were stuck for a long time. It seemed like they couldn't break through in the technology, and now they clearly have. And so I think you need to be wary also of, we keep talking about sitting down at a meeting. I don't want that to be the sort of the subject of this podcast. This could be an online, a Zoom meeting, a phone call with your bank. Like you got to be wary on all different aspects. It could be an email exchange. It could be a chat exchange on, one of although their AI sucks, so it probably wouldn't work. It would crash, and they'd probably end up telling you after an hour of chatting, just phone us and see if we can help. But otherwise, other than the AI chat stuff, banks are getting pretty modern. So I don't think we're not trying to portray a situation of like you and I sitting here. Right?
Yeah, and they're definitely trying to drive you away from the in-branch and onto the online, because then they can be giving you the offers right on the app.
And ultimately they can cut branches.
It saves money for them.
The more they do that, right?
So it's all good for them then.
Yeah.
So okay, well let's hit some practical advice then here. How do you navigate all of this selling? And we've already come up with one obvious answer, and that is be prepared, be proactive.
Set the terms of the discussion ahead of time. That's what I was saying before, right? So sit down with them or on the phone or chat or online or whatever and say, look, I'm not buying anything today because that's not what I want. I want whatever I'm here for.
Yeah, Scott told me to come and open a new bank account. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I don't need all the overdraft protection, insurance, credit cards, whatever. Here's what I'm here to do.
I would always suggest that if you're saving for an emergency fund or something like that, do it at another bank. You do all your banking at Bank A, but you use your emergency fund, which is $2,000 or $5,000 or whatever $1,000 over here, because then Bank A that's trying to sell you stuff doesn't know that that's there, or even if you tell them, they can't access it. It's not part of the sales pitch. It doesn't come into play, and it's safe because it's not in the house. Okay. Beware a bank that is new to you. We're back to the sales thing, the competition and the commissions, right? When you're new to a bank, they're totally aggressive. They're all over you. They're hanging on your leg before you leave.
They got deals.
So just understand that a bank's job is to sell, and if you're new to them, you're fresh meat. Great. If you know that, it's going to change the discussion. Be wary of taking on any debt to either save, invest, whatever we were talking about before. It's very easy to say yes to a sum of money. 10 grand. That's a lot of money to someone who's struggling. Okay. It's a fortune to someone who's struggling. It's a fortune anyway, but just be very wary of taking on debt, because the long-term repercussions of it, you could be buying yourself a 10 or 15-year problem in a 5-minute exchange.
Easily.
Don't want to do that.
Yep.
If you want financial advice, get it independently. Don't get it from your bank. I'm not here to knock banks, but I'm here to set a mindset for people of looking out for themselves, which the bank's not necessarily doing. So your bank is trying to sell stuff from the bank because they don't make money if they sell you stuff from somewhere else. Whereas an independent advisor is working for you, and if it's someone you can build a relationship with over time, it's even better.
Well, and let's break that down, because that's a very key point. Yeah. So the bank will almost always sell you their own products.
Yeah.
So
if that's how I'm getting paid.
Exactly.
Like you mentioned, 100% commission, not 50 or 30.
That's how all my compensation
That's
comes
how
from.
I'm eating my groceries. Right?
So if I go into the bank and I need a credit card, it is highly unlikely that the bank is going to offer me the Visa card they offer me. They're not going to offer me an American Express card if that's not something their bank offers.
No.
Even if it for some reason would be a better thing.
Now, if it's a side thing, like I'll use an example because I have to. Scotia has a connection with Amex. So if you're sitting in a Scotia bank and they offer you an Amex, that's theirs.
It's also
theirs. So know
theirs.
that stuff ahead of time too, right? Yep. Know the connections between financial institutions that have arrangements with banks, right?
Well, it's a good idea to understand who owns who too. So Simply Financial, is that an independent bank?
No. They're owned by CIBC.
What about Tangerine?
Scotia,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So these are connections that are really important actually to make, because now you know that is that independent advice or not.
Well, and the better example would be on the investment side, things like mutual funds and ETFs, exchange traded funds. So if you have a brokerage account at a bank, through their brokerage arm, you can pretty much buy anything. But when you go into the branch and talk to a financial advisor, they are almost always going to sell you the product that their own bank produces. Because, as you just said, they might be getting all of their compensation from selling that particular product.
And you don't have to do our job to know all that stuff. Like a cursory Google search will prepare you ahead of time for stuff like that, right? Like, okay, I'm going in to meet with TD. Who's TD own on the Toronto Stock Exchange? Who's TD got relationships with in the States? Because a lot of Canadian banks have very regional presences in different regions of the States. So again, if you're down there and you're a Canadian, maybe you want to check out to see who's who and who owns what.
Well, and you and I both do credit counseling sessions for our clients after they filed a proposal. There are 2 sessions where we go through money management, and a lot of the time my clients say, okay, well, now that I got my debt under control, I want to start saving money. Can you give me some advice on that? I say, great, no problem. What bank are you with? They tell me, and I say, great, let's pull it up on the computer right now, because a lot of the sessions we're doing over Zoom or video or something, so we can actually share screens. And I say, let's go right to your bank now and look at what products they offer. And so again, I'm not going to mention names here, but we were looking at one yesterday, and of course they had these products and they were all branded with their own name. And I said, let's take a look at what the fee is that they charge on this particular mutual fund. And the ones we were looking at were somewhere between 1% and 2% MER, management expense ratio. And then I said, let's go look at another company. And again, I'm not mentioning names because these guys aren't sponsoring the podcast. So if they want to sponsor the podcast, I'll mention names. But there are a ton of ETFs out there and we found a whole bunch of them.
But wouldn't that render our advice and then bias?
Exactly. I guess you're right.
We can't do that.
I guess you're right. Sorry, forget it. You can't advertise. they had management expense ratios of 0.1%. So that's 1/10 of 1% for what was essentially the same product.
Yeah. A lot different from 3.
Well, and even 1%. The difference between 0.1% and 1% is 10 times.
Yeah.
And so I guess if you have to pay someone all of their commission, all of their compensation based on commission, you have to have products that can generate that. So again, understanding what you're paying is, I think, critical advice in that.
So just know ahead of time who's who. Your little connections chart, right? Do a Venn diagram for yourself. Like, who do these guys own? Who are these?
Venn diagram.
Venn diagram. Did I say Venn?
Yeah.
Okay. Not a vehicle identification number
with
diagram.
Their
because I don't think that
because
exists.
we have
it's
to make
Venn
sure
diagram,
there's security on their cards. There you go.
You're the brain.
We'll edit that out. It won't make it to air anyway.
So a Venn diagram. See who's who. And that will make you understand better who's selling what to whom.
So, okay, we got 5 minutes left. Not that we've ever kept this show to 30 minutes, but what are your other pieces of advice then for people to be alert to what's going on? How to keep yourself from not getting hammered by the bank's sales tricks?
Well, I would also look, so make sure you understand your own situation as well. That sounds maybe obvious, but I don't think.
Well, actually, that
people who talk to us, I think, made decisions that were bad, based on bad advice, but also based not on good motivations from recognizing their own weaknesses and their own situation honestly and
I like that, understanding your own situation.
Yeah.
So your own situation could mean I'm going to the bank because I need to borrow money.
Yeah.
I need to, get a car loan, mortgage, whatever.
Yeah.
I would start by getting my own credit report first.
Yeah.
So that when I walk into the bank, I know, hey, I've got a really good credit score or I've got a really lousy one. And therefore, that's going to impact
that
how
will
I
tell
can
you
negotiate.
Probably what that bank person is thinking because they're looking at that. They've already looked at it. So you at least have to. Think of it this way. So if you were, instead of an individual, you were a business and you were pitching a business plan to a bank or an investor or whatever, you would have all your numbers, you'd have your balance sheet, you'd have your income and expense statement, your cash flow, you'd have it all laid out for them. So why don't we do that with personal, right? Like if you're in there, and the reason we're going at this so much is 5 or 10 people that we meet with a day, we ask them all that stuff. What are your assets? What are your liabilities? What's your expenses? They can typically rattle off their monthly expenses, like almost to the dollar.
Everybody knows their rent.
Everyone lives monthly. I've said that on this podcast 500 times. But what they're less good at or aware of is, the assets, if there's joint assets or not, whatever, what's the outstanding, that like secured versus unsecured.
What's your debt to income ratio?
What's your debt to income ratio? Exactly. So in other words, what is your financial picture? Because if you know that better than anyone could, then you will also be in a more advantageous position when the bank person or whomever you're sitting with is pitching you products because they're going to know it. They're going to have checked your, as you said, your credit report. They'll probably know all your assets and liabilities because you're banking with them. So the very least you can do is know your own info. Yeah,
and we've done lots of shows on credit reports, and I'm not a fan of obsessing over them. I don't think you should be checking it on the app on your phone every 15 minutes. But if you are going in to apply for a mortgage, for example, then it would be a very good idea to get your credit report, which you can get for free from both Equifax and TransUnion. Make sure there's no mistakes on it. Make sure it's all cleaned up. And if you really want to, pay the money directly to Equifax and TransUnion to get your credit score, I mean, you can use one of those free apps that you already trashed, and I agree with you. The information tends not to be accurate anyways.
I'm off the Christmas card list, but I've been off it for 14 years.
They will not be sponsoring the podcast.
No.
But yes, you want to have the information so that when you go there, you're negotiating. And if there's an error on your credit report and the bank says, oh, we're going to have to charge you this interest rate because your credit, and you say, wait a minute, no, I've got proof that that's not correct. The bank can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
So having that information, and you mentioned about businesses and business plans. If I was going into the bank for a loan, I would have with me my recent pay stubs, my tax return, an appraisal on my house, my brokerage statement, whatever. Yeah. You go in there,
and even things like, do you have life insurance, or are you know all of your, not only your assets, liabilities, your income, expenses, but all of your other financial matters, right? Your RSPs, your pension plan. plans, your insurance coverages, and that kind of thing. Like have the entire picture in front of you and also in your head.
Yep, I totally agree. Okay, so my closing comment is understand that the person on the other side of the desk is trying to sell you something.
There's motivation.
There's motivation.
Just like there's motivation for you to be there.
Absolutely. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying you need to understand it.
Yeah.
And just like when you go into the car dealership, you're on guard because you know they're going to try to sell you something. When you go to a bank, same thing. You should be on guard because they're going to try to sell you something. Mm-hmm. They're very good at it. It might be subtle, but they're very good at it. So you go in there with your own agenda. I came in to do this specific transaction. This is what I'm here for. Yeah. I'm happy to consider all of your offers. I'll go home and think about it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and with bank sales, it's more subtle than car sales, right? Because when you're in the car dealership, you want that shiny machine.
Turbo. It's turbo.
Yeah, and there's all the catchwords like that, right? Like leather and all that. So in a bank, it's not that sexy. Like it's $10,000 that they're giving me. That's pretty cool. But it's not the same type of sales situation, right? It's more subtle. It's a little more maybe tricky. I don't mean that like as badly as it sounds, but it is. I mean, selling is tricky in general. But yeah, it's just be a little more cautious that it's probably a little more incipient and you didn't see it coming.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I agree. If you got your eyes open, you're much more likely to see something.
Yes.
There you go. Said. That's brilliant. If you have your eyes open, you're much more likely to see something. Brilliant. Scott,
you got a subject for your next book.
There you go. There's the next book. I got to write that down. Well, I can watch the replay and then I'll know. Scott, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
That is our show for today. Now, we mentioned a whole lot of previous shows where we talked about a lot of this stuff. So the show notes on both YouTube and whatever podcasting app you're listening to will have all those links to it. If you are watching on YouTube, you know the routine. Click all the buttons because that's, I don't know, it does something to the algorithm or something.
It's apparently good.
It's a good thing. Mm-hmm. So we actually have more than 10,000 subscribers to this podcast.
We're a kind of a big deal.
My goodness. So please continue to help promote it in that way. And if you are listening on the audio version, which is how most people listen to it. Most people are not sitting here watching you and I trying to read our notes
I hope
here.
Not.
Most people listen to the audio version. So again, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, click the subscribe button. Every Saturday morning, a new episode comes out. And so we appreciate it. Scott, thanks for being here. That was our show for today. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.